were talking a little bit about the collaborative process, which seems like it worked really well. Just wondering if you could maybe share how each of you found your way into the project. What was the thing that enabled you to really find it?
Mm-hmm. Well, Eleanor contacted me, and that's how I got into it. That's a short answer. Do you need in terms of how we started working together? Or?
Like, I know I've spoken to Chris before about sort of what really connected him to the art and was able to do it. Just what was your way to find the emotion in the project?
I was given a dream brief. I was asked to sort of go from Cunningham down to the other end of the southern part of East Lothian and capture as much of the coastline as I could. The geology and the geography of it, which is great because I really like looking at geology and rocks and stuff. But I went a bit beyond that and went to Cove and the Scottish borders as well. So for me, it was just an open brief to capture as much of that as possible, and in a mixture of photography and film. So I started. It was in the summer, so I started really early in the morning at sunrise. Started in Cunningham there, and then worked my way down throughout the course of the day to sunset to the Cove, and just filmed everything I could until I ran out of memory cards and batteries with 3 different drones. I did a mixture of low, high stuff, different angles, different compositions, trying to find abstract shapes, and that's how I got into it. And managed to catch a basking shark as well, which was really cool.
That was amazing.
That was that was just a piece of it was just fantastic to see.
It's incredible you happened to be out on that day as well. It was really amazing. But yeah, I contacted Andy when I started the Masters. We were kind of looking into all the sort of things that inspire us, and it led me back to my childhood quite a lot, where I grew up in the north of Fife on the coast, and I used to kind of walk along the beach there quite a lot with my family. But my grandparents lived in the Jurassic Coast in Dorset, so we spent a lot of our childhood down there. There's a lot of this coastline that really reminds me of that, and the kind of layers of history are just phenomenal. So that's really what I wanted Andy to capture, was just all the layers of rock and how they sort of integrate with each other. I'd heard lots of great things about Andy, and I knew that he was local as well and would understand the kind of the coastline and the geology of it. So that's how we kind of came to meet. And then I actually met Chris through Sara, who's been a friend of mine since we were in our 20s, and I was talking about music that could go along with the footage, and we just started talking about Chris and what he does.
And it was true serendipity as well, because we met at the Duke's Gallery, where Eleanor's got a lot of, or has had a lot of work. It's where your studio is as well. And Sara, as you've just said, had suggested that we meet. And I thought, fine, I'll go meet. Not really understanding why or what the future might hold in terms of projects and things. And I walked into the gallery and I saw Eleanor's work, having not seen it before. And it hit me like a sucker punch, really. And sorry, I know you're sitting next to me, but you're going to have to ride through it. But it's I've described it before as there's no melody within Eleanor's art, and I mean that as a big compliment. Like the layers and all of the different materials and things like that really struck me, because I, as a composer, rely on melody. Like I try. If I'm known for anything, it's my ability to write with a melody, and so then to try to meet and to have this great instant connection with Eleanor, and then talk about the project. And actually I hadn't seen any of the footage before I sat down and I wrote the music, but I knew exactly what I needed to write before I'd seen any of the footage, based entirely on what you'd created as an artist. And so ultimately that was just sitting down and having complete freedom with working for a project that I knew that I was going to admire, even though I'd never seen the footage.
And the painting that we saw together was of Belhaven, where you've got like a real kind of connection of walking as well. So and a painting I love so much, it now hangs in my house.
It's this beautiful abstract of Belhaven and the bridge to nowhere on that beach. And every time I look at it, something else comes at me. And the reason I talk about it not having melody, and I apologise if that's a bit of a clumsy way of putting it, but the point is that with abstract art, as Eleanor does it, if you're looking at a piece of, oh God, I don't know, I can't think off the top of my head of an artist who, you look at the painting and you see exactly what's there instantly, and you're like, okay, fine, move on, see the next one. But where there's something that doesn't have that melody in it, as Eleanor creates, it's constantly evolving every time you look at it. And that's interesting to me as a composer, because hopefully when you listen to that sort of music in tandem with the film, something else might, because it's all layered, something else might pop out at you at the same time. So it was a wonderful experience to write it for you.
Thanks, guys. I think landscape works in a really interesting way in that video as well, where it kind of stops being a physical space in and of itself and becomes more of a vessel for exploring these ideas of identity and belonging and just emotion in general. I don't know if you guys felt that watching it, but I think there's really strong emotions coming through. And I was just wondering for each of you, if landscape works as a medium for you to sort of explore some of these emotions as well. I know, Eleanor, you've done more landscape stuff in the past, but even in more an abstract way.
Yeah, I think it's funny, I was having a conversation with somebody that came to see the exhibition this morning, and they were saying that abstract work, quite often there's more of that emotion in, and I think it's kind of a layered thing. A lot of the exhibition is about memory and how that changes and shifts over time, and how, like the landscape, catastrophic things can happen in our lives, and how we sort of recover from that shapes who we are. So I think the landscape and our own kind of personal emotions and memory are so kind of closely linked. But I think with an abstract piece, if you have somebody that buys that piece from you, or who just responds to it and understands it, it has almost kind of like a deeper connection. And although it's been inspired by the landscape, perhaps you can see that even from the abstract pieces that are here, but it involves much more of the kind of mood of the landscape, and the mist and the kind of different layers that go on in the landscape. So I think there's definitely more emotion and more kind of personal shared connection, I think, when you find that connection over a piece of abstract art, then there might be something that's much more directly, obviously, a replica of the landscape.
Yeah, so it's a strange thing, because I feel like with aerial and drone videography and photography, you see it's all a big picture thing. Normally, you're really high, everything looks kind of different, but at the same time, I think some things are sort of timeless, and you see how, when you're on the ground seeing something at eye level, like Max shoots down here, or more intimate stuff, a lot of the sort of things like trends and fashions and things age quite quickly, but from the air things often look the same, and they do for a long time. I'm not sure how that reflects on community and belonging, but it means it's a way of showing something which kind of feels timeless. And on the other hand, though, you can do that. You could also show things changing with times of day, with seasons, and if things are changing in the landscape, you can really see it from above. So it's a strange medium, I think. It kind of feels unnatural because we don't fly around in the air, but at the same time, to me, it feels like it is quite a natural way to look at things from above.
It really changes perspective as well. A view everyone might know very well at street level,
Yeah.
all of a sudden seeing it from above, it really gives a different dimension.
I think the salt marshes down near at the River Tyne estuary are really interesting, because if you go there for a walk at ground level, it's not much to look at. It's pretty boring. It's mud and flat. When you see it from above, it looks amazing. It looks like an organism or something. It looks like trees or like kind of capillaries or something like that. It just looks completely different.
You've quite often said it looks like the landscape breathing, doesn't
does,
it?
yeah.
As it sort of fills and empties.
The tide comes in and out every day, so it changes throughout the day from being water to land and back again. Looks very cool.
And Chris, do you engage with any sort of landscape as you use?
Yeah, not entirely, but yes, it's always there. I think the way that I like to write music is a lot of the albums that I've released and things, my mantra with it is I like to write it as though if you were to close your eyes and listen to a piece of the music, there's no point in that music at which you'd ever want to open them, i.e. it's all enveloping. And a lot of that's come from sort of an approach to, I guess, mental health and mindfulness and things, and that, being on a beach and just watching metronomic, the waves kind of coming in, or even being in the hills and you know, watching the wind over a cornfield, or that kind of stuff. That was ultimately really calming randomness of nature. I find it really inspiring, for sure. But then, you know, there's naturally other things come into play in terms of how I like to write. It's not entirely about the land.
So I know you all mentioned a lot about memories and things like that, especially Eleanor, I know your work, you're looking a lot at that. What's your thoughts on how art can, either in any form, work to preserve memories and shared histories for a community and give that sort of sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting living here, because it kind of reminds me so much of where I grew up and also where I kind of spent time with my grandparents. But I think there's a huge sense of pride in this area of coastline around where we live and how beautiful it is and how much history it holds. And I think that already is a huge kind of collective sharing of something that inspires all of us, and that, you know, that's part of the reason that we live here. So I think it's, for me, kind of about reflecting that in my work. It's about reflecting the layers of rock and the weather formations that come in and the mist that kind of often hangs on the hills, and all of those things, I think, are things that people instinctively see in my work and recognise about the landscape. And I think when you can have those conversations with people, it definitely brings a shared sort of identity between you, and it's, you know, it begins a conversation about your own history and your own memories and how collectively they are something that we all share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of brings you, Eleanor, to the idea of regeneration. That is the title of your exhibition. I was wondering if you could give some information of why you chose that title and what that speaks to.
Yeah, so I asked Andy just before I did the exhibition to shoot some footage of John Muir Country Park, and when I moved to Dunbar about 5 years ago, and it was quite soon after that Storm Arwen happened, and I walked through the woods almost daily with my dog, and they just felt like such a nurturing and really warm kind of place. I quite often feel like being in woodland is sort of like being enveloped by a hug almost. It sort of just makes you feel really connected to the landscape. And there was just the most beautiful kind of weather when I first moved there, and it had these incredible memories. And I think when the storm hit and took down so many trees, it was really emotional. I know loads of people walked there afterwards and were really, you know, close to tears, seeing the sort of devastation around the landscape. And it's been quite a strange place to be since then, because the trees just all stayed where they were and nothing was done with them for such a long time. So there was always this kind of sort of memory of it, of the fact that the storm had happened and how catastrophic that had been. But then the forest floor started to kind of repair itself, and it made me think, what does it look like, you know, from above, especially with them starting to kind of fell the woodland and making these really sort of regular piles of logs. I kind of just wondered about how that would look with the sort of tangle of undergrowth that had started to reformulate. And it just made me think about our connection to the land and how we regenerate ourselves after something like that happened, and how the landscape just seemed to be doing that as well. And I think the footage that you've shot, there's a few of the photographs at the back which a lot of people have thought are paintings, because I think they do look like that when you look at it from above. But yeah, it's just been amazing to see that perspective.
It's actually even it's amazing to see it from above. It looks like it's just been kind of really kind of callously sliced down with a scythe or something like that. But even on ground level in Cunningham, you see some of the big trees that are hundreds of years old that just got knocked down in the storm. They look like they've been just smashed with a hammer or something. It's the violence of them on ground level is quite something. And then when you see it from above, you can see the patterns you can almost see where the wind's been and ripped through it. So and then John Muir Country Park now has just been felled, like you say, so it looks really empty. It looks completely different. Yeah, it's a strange one. I think for me, filming that last bit, it didn't feel like I was looking at the same place. It felt like a different place.
It is shocking when you go. I remember just specifically on the John Muir Park thing. Right, my eldest, I used to push his buggy around there to get him to go to sleep, and we used to spend a lot of time at the East Links Park as well. And so I knew that place, and we haven't been back because it's grown out of East Links, and so we don't go back. We quite often drive past it. And actually 2 weekends ago, we went to the play park just outside the country park, and I saw it properly close up for the first time in years, and it was like, take your breath away, shocking at how much it was really sad being there, because it was this amazing wood where you'd go half jogging around it and seeing this thing. So yeah, just the way, sort of awestruck really by what nature did to that place, and the way that you talk about it though is really interesting, because I can't see a beauty in that. As you have.
It's kind of poignant. I think it took me a long time to see that. Like, first of all, it was just really emotional. I didn't want to walk in the woods for a long time. I just kind of went along the beach instead. But I think it's amazing how it has regenerated itself. It's amazing to kind of watch that process and understand that brings its own kind of completely different sort of landscape, and it does. I think it just has made me think so closely about how the landscape is connected to all of us, and how that whole process of regeneration is connected to our own kind of personal experiences of things that have happened to us. And it's a very different place to walk around now, but I do see like a real beauty in how it's healed itself, almost like you do with people. I think when something difficult happens and people get through it, it's just amazing how we all have the capacity to do that, and so does the planet. It's incredible.
I think it's clear that I think that creativity is a way to sort of preserve your own memories and heal your own thoughts about things. And do you think it has a point in a wider world as well, at a community level, where creativity can have positive effects?
Yeah, definitely. I think everything from the fact that, painting is a very meditative process. It's sometimes frustrating and infuriating, but most of the time when I'm in my studio, I'm in a kind of sense of flow that just feels like nothing else that I know, really. It takes me away from the world, and I'm dyslexic, so I think my brain is always on the go, and it's the only thing that's ever kind of completely quietened it down. So ever since I was a tiny child, drawing has just been such a meditative process for me. And I think it's the same for everyone, really. I think so many people have got these awful experiences of when they were younger and they were maybe told by a teacher that they couldn't paint or they couldn't draw. And everyone can, and it doesn't even matter what it looks like. Mainly it's kind of about the process of actually doing that. And I think it brings so many people so much joy. And I think I was speaking to quite a few people this morning that were just saying how lovely it is that there's so much of that around East Lothian and Edinburgh as well. There's a huge kind of creative network of people, and it's just a really inspiring place to be because of that.
I think we're living in a world where people are talking more about mental health and toolkits that we need to have in order to remain lucid, I guess. And I find that I've in writing music, I in the sort of mindful way of being in that instant moment, I get more out of writing the music than I do listening to it again after I finish writing it. It's such a meditative process, and to be able to do that inspired by art and have that extra little bit of kit there, that is something that you genuinely love. My painting of Belhaven, Bridge to Nowhere and things, and to have that, to bring it back to this film and writing the music for the film was an amazing experience, just to be in the moment doing it. And so I think very similarly, although we've never actually discussed it before, the actual process of what we do means more than the result. And I think that's a reason why it can be successful.
Yeah, I just love doing I love flying drones. But for me, it's less the sort of the kit and stuff. I think for a lot of people that get into aerial film and photography, it's about the machine, and to me, it's more like I just like seeing what you can see from above. But I really enjoy the editing process as well. But I think it's interesting that we sort of you got me to involved to do some image creation. You created something new with it, and then Chris worked with both of those things to make another thing. So there's 3 different layers of it all coming together, inspiring each other. But without each other, it wouldn't have happened at all, or it wouldn't have happened in the same way. So I like seeing it and then seeing where it goes next. But I think slightly different to Chris. I do love looking at my stuff later on, but it's not in a sort of, oh, look what this is great. It's more, you can sort of see through a viewfinder what you are looking at, but then the camera itself can be like 500. No, that's illegal. How long? Let me think. 120 is up. 500 feet away. But it can be a long way away from you, so you're disconnected with what you're actually capturing at the time. So when I look at stuff later on, and when I get home, sometimes I see things that I didn't really see at the time. So I kind of like the second part of the process as well.
But do you have an expectation though, with your experience? Do you then you're going and flying something, and of course you can't know exactly what you're going to see until you see it.
Yes.
And so, but you must know.
Yeah,
this is going to be a bit like that.
Yeah, it gets better with experience. To begin with, I had lots of surprises, but the more you do it, the more you kind of know. You know how it's going to look. But
there was a patch of ground you came across, wasn't there, in the woods that was just like a complete circle, and it had a tree in the middle of it that you didn't know was there, and you can't really see when you're walking around on foot. But it's like this amazing clearing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's you can see it on Google Maps, but it's not that interesting to look at there. But I had to walk all the way around the estuary to the other side. It took about half an hour to get there. And it's sort of off the path most people take, but it's clearly been a man-made clearing with a tree in the middle. And then you have to kind of work your way through sort of knee-high ferns and thistles to get to it. But then from above it looks fantastic. It's just this geometric shape with a tree in the middle. You see really similar things in Binning Woods, but it's kind of well-trodden paths there. It's really easy to get around. It looks just like that, but it's in a place where you wouldn't expect it to be, which is quite cool. But you can't see that from the ground. You'd have to see it from above.
And just before we open it up for questions, anyone in the audience, I just wondered, Eleanor, if you could just maybe explain, your exhibition is so multi-sensory when you're walking through. It feels like there's things you want to touch and look at. Just wondering if you could maybe give us some information how you arrange the items and how you decided about the layout.
Yeah, it's quite different to any exhibition I've done before, which has mainly been in a gallery space and had paintings on the walls. But I think for the Masters particularly, the tutors wanted us to create something that was much more immersive and sort of almost felt like you were walking into a painting. And I also kind of took me back to textiles, which is what I studied originally. So yeah, it gave me an opportunity to kind of use textiles, but it almost was like they wanted you to sort of feel like you were walking through a landscape. And it really connected me to a course that I did at the end of last year with a textile artist called Matthew Harris, where he got us to kind of walk around the landscape and then take ink and kind of draw with our eyes closed a sort of pattern of where we'd walked through the landscape, and do that with various kind of different sort of formats of painting, and that definitely did something in my head that made me sort of think differently about the way that I paint. And I think that's sort of been brought to life in the structures that you can see in the exhibition. So yeah, I think it's a much more sort of three-dimensional way of looking at things. It probably has more of a connection to the landscape, even though it's still quite abstract.
That's amazing, thank you. And do we have any questions? Yes.
Yes, I think what you're saying about textures and layers of a collaboration and how each part makes a bigger whole. But the first part of the collaboration you've not spoken about is your choice of words. Choice of words, so the written word over the spoken word, for instance. Who chose the words? Was it a shared thing there? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for this particular piece, it was my words, mainly because that was a different project for the Masters that we did. But it's really interesting that you say that, because poetry has been something that I've really sort of thought a lot more about recently, and I have had a friend who does a lot of spoken word, and she has written some stuff for me just in the last week or so. So that's something I'll definitely use going forward, and we've kind of said it would be lovely to do a collaboration around that as well in the future. But yeah.
I think the words definitely influenced the editing of the video as well. I was looking for imagery that would reflect the words that you wrote for it. So it was it was a part of the process that came before the edit took place, as opposed to later on.
And that was much more about home, so it was about connection to the landscape, but also what all of us perceive as home, which was kind of more the sort of previous project that I was doing, but I think it's still definitely very relevant to a sort of sense of belonging and how you kind of feel that about a place. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just thinking that, you know, when you hear music, it comes in at a part of the psyche, it's almost unconscious. And the visual image can be like that, and the texture of artwork, whereas the written word isn't like that. It's more, you're doing a process in the brain where you're seeing it as an art, but then you're interpreting it and changing it into what the spoken words and meaning. So it's different, isn't it?
It is.
The word is very different.
Absolutely, it is, yeah. And I think there was a definite intention to leave the questions there instead of writing what I thought my answers would be, because I really wanted people to be able to then think about their own personal experiences in relation to those questions, yeah.
When you're doing the work, you have a big space. What I get the impression is that you're doing a lot of things at once. And then,
How did you know?
Quickly, and then going back to them. So is it mainly instinct that makes you go back to them? I mean, did you have them lying about for ages and then something just strikes and you...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I've got a really big studio space that's probably about the size of this full room. And yeah, I generally tend to work on about 15 or 20 pieces at a time. And I just...
A lot of tables.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a joiner to make one recently actually that's like about 12 feet square, and it sort of folds down. It's great. But yeah, I do find that I build up about 10 or 20 layers in most of my work, of all different things, paint and kind of paper and all sorts of materials. But yeah, it's always a very difficult thing knowing when something's finished. But I have to go back to something multiple times over a period of months before I kind of feel like it's
so
there.
So if you don't know it's finished, do you have like a wall space where you put it up?
Yeah,
and you just sit and
just
work?
keep coming back to
Listen
it.
Music when you're...
I do, I love listening to music, yeah. I have headphones in most of the time when I'm painting, yeah. And it's funny the way that artists quite often say that a painting speaks to them because it sounds a bit random, but it really does. Whenever I go into the studio, there is one piece that I'm kind of immediately connected to, that I see something needs to be done in that I've maybe not seen before. And I think it often takes me at least a few days of being away from my work to see that and come back in and have some sort of clarity about what needs to be done next.
So that gives you perspective.
Yeah.
It's like a bit of a dance.
Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah.
That's really interesting though as well, because I want to know what you listen to. What do you listen to?
My music taste is unbelievably eclectic.
No, but I don't mean it.
A lot of it is dancey. A lot of it.
So without making you a sitting duck, what I am asking is that does the choice of music directly affect the way that you paint?
It does. I've never really thought about that, and I think that's been what is really interesting about working with you actually, because I don't generally tend to listen to anything that's classical, and I think having worked with you and started painting from the music that you've sent me, we've kind of done this process where we've gone back and forwards with Chris has sent me something to listen to and I've painted something on the back of that. And that music is much calmer to the sort of stuff that I listen to normally. So yeah, I think that probably has made a change.
It wasn't a loaded question at all. I've never asked you about whether the soundtrack gives you a different manner in which you would paint.
I think it probably has, yeah. I think there's been a fluidity and a sort of calmness to the things that I've done when I've been listening to the music that you sent, whereas normally it's much more frenetic and a bit,
I think
more lively.
this is as an example of two people who have met almost by chance, who, with different forms of art, I think approach it with the same in the same way. And I don't know about you, but I'm every day inspired by this woman's art, and it's changed the way that I write, and that's just the truest sense of collaboration. It's an amazing thing, And what have we known each other? What, under a year? And I think you could say quite comfortably that the style of music that I write, I'm writing an album at the moment, and let's not talk about that, but I'm writing an album at the moment that is completely different to anything I've ever written. And that is largely down to this woman, having met her. So there we go.
Just interesting.
I don't know what to say to that.
It's a compliment.
Yeah, I'm loving that you're moving on quickly.
Before I forget this,
Go on,
interesting
make her cry.
thing is that, so Eleanor brought me into the project, and then independently from, I didn't know Chris was involved, found out Chris was working on it, but Chris and I had also worked together on a separate project before that, so it's a coincidence, but I think it makes sense that we've worked on, because Chris's music lends itself really well to the sort of films that I've shot as well. So
It's a lovely community.
when I found out Chris was working with you, it's like, oh, of course, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it's very, very fortunate, and I don't mean to make you blush, but it's when you meet other artists who work with different mediums and they inspire you, it's quite a powerful thing. And it's been like that with you.
Likewise, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really interesting listening to you talk about your process with your question and thinking about it in the context of like with the regeneration theme and the perspective you get with the aerial stuff and the time and the distance you need to be able to see from like that interior perspective walking through the woods what the changes are. And so I don't really know what the question is. I just wanted you to speak a little bit more about like how working in the abstract and working in these like layers and needing time with each canvas and having to sort of like skip around a bit. You can't just do it in a oneer and make it representational. That you're like mirroring it almost all through the thing. So it's like the time that you need from a catastrophic event to regenerate and like the time that anyone could notice, that a viewer could notice the regeneration happening, and then the way it is so diffuse and sort of like the way that, if you think that working abstractly and the way that you work is mirroring that intentionally, or if it's just something I'm cooking up in my head like a crazy person.
No, I think it is definitely. I've always had a real, like I take pictures all the time of worn surfaces, and I've always been really interested in the human impact on the world. And just being able to see that, you know, in worn surfaces everywhere, like, you know, I'm constantly taking pictures of worn sort of stone and things underfoot, because I just find it really fascinating to look at.
Instagram's so interesting.
Thank you. I haven't been on there for a while, but I will be now. But yeah, I've always found that fascinating, and I think my paintings reflect that. They often, you know, you can see that wearing down of the surface and building up of lots and lots of layers and kind of wearing them back, and it does become like one of those surfaces that has a history and has depth to it and has texture to it, and so I think that's massively important. And also the kind of weather patterns that are around here and are around the coast, like the mist and the fact that you don't quite know what you're seeing. There's kind of hidden elements that are like memories or like seeing something through mist. I find that really intriguing and compelling. So yeah, thank you.
So do you just mess about with materials, or would you actually study and look up how different materials would react?
Mainly I just experiment. Yeah, I have done quite a lot of courses with different artists, and I've done a lot at Paintbox School of Art, done a lot at Leith School of Art, and then obviously, you know, having studied textiles. But no, it is more sort of experimentation, and there's these wonderful sort of things that happen. Like I use a lot of Japanese paper. Recently I've started using tea bag paper, which has this wonderful quality of sort of absorbency, but also is very transparent when you kind of use it in a painting. And I had a situation where I went into a gallery and was talking about that recently, and then they said that some guy had just given them a roll of tea bag paper a couple of hours before and gave it to me. And there's all these kind of weird serendipitous kind of moments that have happened recently that have just made me think, you know, you're using the right materials and you're on the right track.
Do you get that from looking at other artists, or just, you know, just walking about and thinking, oh, like that might go with that, or?
Yeah, I think there definitely is, yeah, a lot of inspiration in looking at other artworks. But I think mainly for me it kind of, yeah, definitely comes from playing about with the materials as much as possible and kind of working out what it is that I want to sort of show. And much of my experimentation has been about films of layers that replicate mist and that, you know, have hidden sort of components that are kind of showing through. So that is constantly what I'm kind of playing about with, is trying to have some elements coming forward and others sort of receding. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a bit of an obsession. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So one more question, anybody? Yeah, the question. I'm intrigued. A lot of my work is about earth, land, landscape as eminent. That it's not this thing that we just record, but actually it's an expression, and that we also are an expression of that land. So what I'm also hearing is your relationship with the land, but also the land's relationship with you, and that you are also an expression of the land. And so there's something happening between you all that you're all kind of weaving in with the land. And that's something I'm appreciating. So just really bringing in the land as element, and also the land as part of this, like the land is sitting here with you, and the land also offers music. It's not devoid of music, and the music comes from the land, and the seeing and the poetry and the images, and just this beautiful weaving and interweaving and all of those things, and the land not as separate, but as flesh in another kind of way. So just appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very integral to what we all do, I think, and shifts and changes so often over time. It's. And
the other thing I picked up in that was when you were speaking about it most, there was a real sense of love in it, and passion and aliveness. And that the art brings you alive, and I would imagine also brings the land alive. That it's not something separate.
I think it's
expression.
Yeah.
I think that's a lovely way to put it, but I think it's also quite important to allow you to understand, or one to understand that for me as a composer, for example, that is always there. So your being, and you are. So if I went for a walk on the beach after this, say, there would always be a melody or something going on in there, and that's inherent with the relationship that I have with that beach at that time, at that moment. And that might turn into something when I get home and I decide to write about it, or it might not. But I think the importance of it is that artistically, it's always in there on some sort of a level, I think.
Yes, beautiful. So that also kind of brings in for me something about how, as we destroy the land, we also destroy the songs, and we destroy the love, and we destroy the language, and we destroy the expressions, which then need to kind of regenerate.
Yeah.
That's where it takes me. But
thank you. Thanks.
Is there anyone else who's leaving? Well, I can say thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Sara.
Thanks so much for coming.